Welcome back, everybody. We are diving deep today into Frank Miller's Batman.
Ooh, interesting.
And it's fascinating because this is the guy who gave us some of the best Batman stories.
For sure.
But he also gave us arguably some of the worst Batman.
Yeah, that's the paradox, right? Like, how can one creator
Right.
have such a huge impact on this character, both good and bad?
Yeah.
I mean, it makes you think about, how these interpretations evolve and change over time.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we've got some great sources.
Oh, excellent.
We're going to be looking at some articles, one from Vox, one from 13th Dimension.
Nice.
And, of course, we're going to be taking a deep dive into The Dark Knight Returns.
Yes, DKR.
DKR, yeah. And for anyone who may not know, the Dark Knight Returns, DKR as we'll call it, is considered one of the most influential Batman stories of all time.
Absolutely. It was a turning point.
Yeah, it was this moment.
It took us away from the campy Batman of the 60s and 70s and moved us into something darker, grittier, more complex.
Right, like psychologically complex. And that's what we're going to be talking about today.
That's our mission today.
Yeah. How did Miller achieve both extremes? The brilliance A and D, the less brilliant.
Yeah.
What does that tell us about Batman as a character?
Right.
And his appeal, his lasting appeal.
That's the big question.
It is. So let's start with The Dark Knight Returns.
Okay, so The Dark Knight Returns, published in 1986.
Okay.
Now, picture the Batman of the Adam West era.
Yeah.
The Super Friends cartoons.
Right.
So that was kind of the image of Batman at the time, right?
Yeah.
Kind of colorful,
Yeah.
campy, maybe even a little silly.
Not the brooding, tormented Batman that we know today.
Exactly, yeah. And then Miller's DKR comes along and throws all that out the window.
Boom.
We've got an older Batman, right? Weary.
Yeah.
A man who's both physically and emotionally scarred.
Years of fighting crime will do that to you.
Right, exactly. And, he's still brilliant. He's still driven, but there's this sense of exhaustion, of world weariness.
Right.
And that was completely new.
Yeah, it really was.
And it's not just a cosmetic change.
Yeah.
This reflects a larger cultural shift, a growing kind of fascination with anti-heroes and the darker side of heroism.
And Gotham itself kind of undergoes a transformation, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. Miller's Gotham, it's a dystopian nightmare.
Yeah.
This city is riddled with crime and decay. It's almost a reflection of the urban anxieties of the 1980s.
Okay.
The fear of crime, the sense of social breakdown. This was the era of Reaganomics, the war on drugs. There was a lot of social upheaval.
Right.
And Miller kind of tapped into that and projected it onto Gotham.
Right.
And it really made the city a character in its own right.
And the violence in DKR was pretty shocking for its time. I mean, that scene with the mutant leader, like he rips out the mayor's throat.
Oh, yeah. Brutal, graphic,
Right.
incredibly unsettling. Miller wasn't afraid to push the boundaries of what was considered acceptable in a superhero comic at that time.
Right.
And I think that's part of what made DKR so groundbreaking, right?
Yeah.
It challenged those conventions of the genre.
Yeah.
Introduced this level of realism and grit
Yeah.
that we hadn't seen before. And it really resonated with audiences, particularly those who were maybe tired of the sanitized, childish portrayals of superheroes in mainstream media.
So the darkness, the violence, it was all an attempt to ground Batman
Yeah.
in a more realistic...
And more adult world.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. But it's important to note that DKR wasn't just about shock value.
Yeah.
There was a purpose to the darkness.
Yeah.
It highlighted the psychological toll of being Batman,
Yeah.
the sacrifices he makes, the burdens that he carries,
Yeah, exactly.
It also allowed Miller to explore some really complex themes
Okay.
of justice and power and the nature of heroism itself.
Right.
I mean, think about the depiction of the mutants, right? This gang of young criminals terrorizing Gotham
Yeah.
that can be seen as a commentary on the anxieties surrounding youth violence,
Okay.
social alienation in the 1980s.
And that brings us to one of the most controversial aspects of DKR,
Okay.
the portrayal of Superman.
Uh-oh.
He's not exactly the Boy Scout that we're used to.
No, not at all. In DKR,
Yeah.
Superman is portrayed as a tool of the government,
Okay.
a symbol of blind obedience to authority, right? He's essentially forced to do the government's bidding,
Yeah.
even when it conflicts with his own moral code.
So we have this clash, right?
Absolutely.
Batman, who represents this individual freedom, right?
Yeah,
Willingness to challenge authority.
yeah.
And then you've got Superman, who embodies the dangers of unchecked power and conformity.
Right.
Powerful statement. especially considering the political climate of the 80s.
Absolutely. And that's where Miller's brilliance as a storyteller really shines.
Yeah.
He takes these iconic characters, uses them to explore these complex themes.
Right.
Power, justice, the role of the individual in society.
Yeah.
And he does it in a way that's thought-provoking and visually stunning.
I mean, it's amazing how much he's able to pack
I know.
into a single graphic novel.
It's incredible, right? The depth of the characterization, the social commentary, the scope of the story. It's no wonder DKR has had such a lasting impact.
And Alan Moore, he called DKR the conclusion of the Batman mythos.
That's right, he did.
Whether you agree with that or not,
Yeah.
there's no denying that
Yeah.
DKR redefined Batman.
For a generation, it set the stage for the darker,
Yeah.
more psychologically complex interpretations that we see today.
And Miller's influence, it extends beyond just Batman too, right? Like his run on Daredevil.
Oh, absolutely. His Daredevil run in the early 80s was equally groundbreaking.
Yeah.
It introduced this level of grit and realism to that character that we hadn't seen before.
And it foreshadowed what he was going to do with Batman.
Oh, absolutely. You can see the seeds of DKR in his Daredevil work.
Right.
The gritty urban landscapes, the brutal violence,
Yeah.
the exploration of complex moral dilemmas. It's all there.
For example, the fight between Daredevil and Bullseye in issue 169.
Oh, that's a classic.
It is.
I mean, that is a prime example
Yeah.
of Miller's willingness to depict violence in a raw, unflinching way.
Yeah.
And it's not just the physical violence that's striking, it's the psychological violence as well.
Right.
The way Miller delves into the minds of these characters, exposing their vulnerabilities
Yeah.
and their darkest impulses, that's what sets his work apart. It's like you can see his artistic DNA in there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and Klaus Janson, the inker on that run, he actually said that.
Wow, really?
You can see how it connects to his later work on DKR.
Yeah.
The use of shadow and chiaroscuro, the
Oh.
urban decay, the flawed heroes, it's all there.
And speaking of his work with Batman, we can't forget about Year One.
Ah, Year One, yes, that was published in 1987. And it really serves as a perfect companion piece to DKR.
Right.
It's a reimagining of Batman's origin story,
Okay.
told in that same gritty, realistic style that he'd already established.
So it's like two sides of the same coin, right?
Yes, exactly.
You have DKR showing us Batman in his twilight years,
The end.
and then Year One showing us how he became the hero.
Right, his formative years.
Yeah.
And both of those stories were hugely influential. They
Yeah.
really helped to solidify this darker, more psychologically complex vision of Batman.
That we still see today.
Absolutely, in comics, film, television, everything.
But then, as we know, things get a little complicated.
Yeah, Miller's later work, it was commercially successful, but the
Yeah.
reaction was a little more mixed.
Yeah.
Some critics have argued that he kind of became a prisoner of his own success.
Okay.
Like he fell into the trap of just repeating the same formula,
Oh,
prioritizing style over substance.
So the darkness and the grit that was
Yeah.
so groundbreaking in DKR in Year One became kind of a caricature.
It became almost a parody of itself.
Wow.
Yeah, like The Dark Knight Strikes Again.
The sequel to DKR.
Right, I mean, it had its moments, sure.
Yeah.
But a lot of people felt it lacked the depth and nuance of the original.
Yeah.
The violence was more gratuitous.
Okay.
The social commentary felt heavy-handed, you know?
Right.
And the characters, especially Batman, they felt less like fully realized individuals
Yeah.
and more like these exaggerated archetypes.
And then there's All-Star Batman and Robin,
Oh, boy.
which it's divisive,
That's one way to put it.
to say the least. I mean, I'm the goddamn Batman line.
I know, right?
Some people thought it was edgy. Some people thought it was cringy.
It's a perfect example of how Miller's stylistic choices, which worked so well in his earlier work,
Yeah.
started to feel excessive, almost self-indulgent.
Right.
The darkness, the cynicism, the over-the-top violence, it just started to feel hollow.
Yeah.
It lacked the emotional resonance and the thematic depth of his earlier stuff.
It's like he lost sight of what made DKR so powerful.
Yeah, I think you're right.
The darkness worked because it was grounded in something real.
You're something human.
Yeah, exactly. It was a reflection of the anxieties and fears of the time.
Right.
But in his later work, it's like the darkness became an end in itself.
It became just a stylistic choice.
Right.
Rather than a reflection of any deeper meaning.
Which is a shame because he is a gifted storyteller.
Oh, he is, without a doubt.
He has this knack for creating memorable character.
Compelling narratives, yeah.
But it's like he got seduced by the darkness,
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
unable to break free from the things that made him famous.
It's like he got trapped in his own style.
And, of course, we can't ignore Holy Terror.
Right, Holy Terror, his graphic novel.
Yeah.
It was originally conceived as a Batman story.
Oh, wow.
But then it morphed into something much more controversial.
Yeah, it's a difficult work to discuss.
It is.
Filled with Islamophobic imagery.
Yeah.
And it was condemned for its xenophobia.
Absolutely. And its simplistic portrayal of very complex geopolitical issues.
It's a stain on his legacy.
It is, unfortunate.
A reminder that even the most talented artists can produce deeply flawed and harmful work.
It's a stark reminder that creative freedom comes with responsibility.
Yeah.
That artists, they have a duty to consider the potential impact of their work.
It's a cautionary tale.
It is.
A reminder that even brilliant artists
Yeah.
can produce deeply flawed and harmful work.
Absolutely.
So we had this fascinating arc, right?
This is a fascinating arc, isn't it?
Frank Miller, this visionary artist who revolutionized Batman with DKR, with Year One.
Pushed the boundaries, challenged our perceptions
Exactly.
of what a superhero story could be.
And then this gradual decline
Yeah.
into excess and repetition.
Culminating in the deeply problematic Holy Terror.
It's a tragic story in a way.
It is. It really is. And it raises some interesting questions about artistic legacy, about the pressures of success, you know, about the dangers of becoming a prisoner of your own style.
And it makes you think about the audience's role in all this too, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, were we complicit?
Were we part of the problem?
Did our appetite for darkness and grit?
Yeah. Did we contribute to his excesses?
And it makes you wonder, can Batman himself escape the shatter of DKR?
That's a good question. Can he evolve beyond the darkness?
The cynicism, the violence.
That Miller helped popularize.
Can he reclaim the mantle of hope and inspiration?
Right. Can he go back to being the symbol he once was?
I mean, we've seen glimpses of it, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We've seen it in recent comics.
Like Batman, White Knight.
Yeah, and films like The Batman.
Right. There's this growing recognition that Batman, at his core, is a symbol of hope.
Of resilience.
Yeah.
The human spirit's capacity for good, even in the face of darkness.
But it's a constant struggle, right?
It is.
This balancing act between the darkness and the light.
And maybe that's what makes him so enduring, right?
Yeah,
he reflects our own internal conflicts.
Right. Our own struggles to find meaning and hope in a world that can feel hopeless at times.
Exactly. Batman is a mirror to our own souls.
He is a reminder that even in the darkest of nights, there's always that possibility of redemption.
Right.
Of rising above our own demons and fighting for a better tomorrow.
And that's a powerful message.
It is a message that transcends any particular era or interpretation.
Yeah.
It speaks to the core of what it means to be human.
So, as we consider Frank Miller's legacy, the triumphs, the missteps, the good, the bad,
the whole shebang,
it's important to remember that Batman is bigger than any one creator.
He's an archetype.
A symbol.
A vessel for our collective hopes and fears.
And his story will continue to be told.
And retold.
Reinterpreted.
Reimagined.
Yeah. For as long as we have a need for heroes.
As long as we need Batman, he'll be there.
And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the complex and fascinating world of Frank Miller's Batman.
It's been a journey. We've explored the highs and the lows, the groundbreaking brilliance of The Dark Knight Returns, and the excesses of his later work.
We've seen it all.
It's been a wild ride.
But I think it's been worth it.
It has. It really has.
Because in grappling with Miller's legacy, we gain a deeper understanding not just of Batman, but of ourselves and the world we live in.
And as we wrap up, I think the most important question we can ask ourselves is this. What kind of Batman do we want to see in the future?
Oh, that's a good one.
Do we want a Batman consumed by darkness?
Yeah.
Or a Batman who represents hope?
A Batman who inspires us.
Exactly. I think the best Batman stories are the ones that remind us that even in the darkest of nights,
there's always a glimmer of light.
Yeah, a spark of hope.
Waiting to be ignited.
And on that note, I think it's time to say goodbye.
Until next time.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Frank Miller's Batman.
Keep exploring.
Keep questioning.
And keep believing in the power of stories.
To change the world.
It really makes you think about how these interpretations can have, well, unintended consequences.
Yeah, for better or worse. I mean, The Dark Knight Returns, it wasn't just a comic.
Right.
It sparked a whole movement.
Oh, it changed how superhero stories were told.
Yeah, but not all of those who followed in Miller's footsteps really captured what he did.
They missed the nuance, the depth.
They focused on the surface.
Yeah, the darkness, the grit, but they missed the point.
Yeah, it's like
It's like trying to copy a painting.
Yeah.
by just looking at the colors.
Right.
But you don't understand the composition, the brushstrokes, the artist's intent.
And you end up with something that looks similar,
Yeah.
but it just doesn't have,
It's missing something.
yeah, that soul.
The heart of it.
Exactly. And I think that's what happened with a lot of the Batman stories that came after DKR.
Oh, for sure.
They were so focused on being dark and edgy
Yeah.
that they forgot what made Batman Batman.
They forgot about the compassion, the intelligence, the belief in justice.
And that's a trap that's easy to fall into?
Oh, yeah. Especially with a character like Batman.
Right. He's so iconic,
Yeah.
so malleable,
It's easy to get caught up in trends, expectations.
and lose sight of your own vision.
You gotta go back to the source.
The Dark Knight Returns. It's flawed,
Oh, absolutely.
but it's a masterpiece.
It's a story that demands to be analyzed, debated, wrestled with.
And in doing so, we can understand Batman better.
And maybe ourselves.
Right, and the world that we live in.
That's the power of these stories.
And so as we leave this deep dive, I think the question we should all ask ourselves is, what kind of Batman do we want?
Yeah, what kind of Batman do we need?
Do we want one who's consumed by darkness?
Or one who represents hope?
The best Batman stories are the ones that remind us that even in the darkest of nights, there's that glimmer of light
A spark of hope.
waiting to be ignited.
Beautifully said.
And on that note, I think it's time to say goodbye.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the world of Frank Miller's Batman.
Keep exploring.
Keep questioning.
And keep believing in the power of stories to change the world.